Thank you very much, dear colleagues. So Marie-Laure just texted me and told me that we have until 12:50 just to finish the panel. So we still have like a bit less than 20 minutes to get questions from the audience. So please do ask your questions here. Thank you. Merci, Yassine. Ici.
Thank you very much again for a wonderful panel. I think, Marie-Laure, you did such a great job to put together these really coherent panels, and the program was fantastic. So it's working out really well. Thank you. I thought this was really, really fascinating, and I'm going to contain myself to two questions. The first one is to Marie. I really liked your intervention, and I think it's such an important discussion to talk about curtails on academic freedom when we think about illiberal playbooks. And one question that I had, I'm not a legal scholar, so it might be a stupid question, right? But one question I had was about the conflation of free speech and academic freedom, which are often, I mean, they obviously go together, but they are separate. And one question I had, this came to me when you were talking about no platforming. And in a way, no platforming seems to me to be a very powerful way to protect academic freedom. If you, well, it's a bit like, you know, banning parties and these sorts of things that are illiberal practices, or maybe seemingly undemocratic practices, but have a very important function in this debate. So I was wondering if you could tease these two apart a little bit. And then a question on, you ended a bit on solutions and or the ways forward or strengthening academic freedom and judicial resistance. And do you think it would be helpful to enshrine academic freedom in constitutions? Like I worked in the Netherlands where it's not in the constitution, and then I moved to Germany where it is in the constitution, and I could see why that is a very powerful way to do, but I'm not an expert, so I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. And then I have a bit of a nerdy comment to Jean-Yves. I hope you will permit me this. Wait, you said that, so I actually fully agree that populism is the wrong term to use, but I think there are different reasons for this, so I don't agree with your argumentation. I would say it's because it is a euphemism to often cover much nastier things like racism or nationalism or whatnot, and it gives far-right actors or illiberal actors the veneer of being democratic, because they have started to embrace the label, saying, well, if it means we speak for the people, then surely it can't be so bad. And you say the opposite is oligarchy, but in the literature, the opposite to populism is often seen as two things, elitism and pluralism. The fact that it has two opposites already says something about how blurry of a concept it is, right? But and the important one here is when pluralism is the opposite, then populism is by definition illiberal, because it's like, for populists, it's me, the people, I am the people, I'm speaking in the people, and that negates the existence of plural opinions. I'd just be curious to see what you think of that. Thanks.
First.
Okay, I'm going first. Thank you for your very interesting questions. Fantastic. So I will answer maybe in three different steps. First, about the articulation between free speech and academic freedom. So I would say it really depends on each national organization and constitutional settlements and how the rights are articulated to one another. Because basically in the US, the case is that the constitutional protection came from the First Amendment on the basis of free speech. So it's like academic freedom being a specific part of free speech. But you have other ways to understand academic freedom, more like a professional rights attached to a specific profession with specific rights. And it is the case in France and Germany, for example. So, and it allows a very specific definition with specific protections that may be here's a bit the conflict you can observe in the US between free speech and academic freedom. This idea that academic freedom is not for everyone. It's a very specific right for a specific profession. Because in the US, you have this idea that academic freedom, you have the academic freedom of the professors, of the students, of the university itself as institutions. And in addition of the conflicts between free speech and academic freedom as a whole, you have conflicts between professor academic freedom against students academic freedom and against institutional academic freedom. And I think even the more recent developments, even before Trump, were more in favor of developing the institutional approach of academic freedom against the professor rights to academic freedom. So it's the very complex articulation that is dependent on the national context, I think. Regarding no platforming, at first, yes, it was development in favor of academic freedom, be sure that some damaging discourse will not find a place on campuses, and ensure that some research like gender studies or racial studies will have full place without being in a permanent and violent conflict with other kind of views. But it was also used, and the mechanism itself was used by conservatives and by far rights against professors and speakers that are in favor of gender studies, social justice in broadly speaking. So the mechanism itself appeared in a specific context that was in favor of developing some research in academic freedom, but it was returned on itself against the same spaces that we try to protect first. And it's a bit, like the idea of judicial activism. For example, it was first seen as something progressist and positive, but now it's used, and we can see with the current Supreme Court in the US that it is used in a conservative way. So it's just the tool that you can use. A knife can be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you use it. And for the defense and the constitutional enshrinement of academic freedom, once again, I'll say that it will really depend on the context and the constitutional culture of the system. In Germany, where it is already in the constitution, yes, of course, it will play an important role, it will be respected, but I think, for example, if I take the case of French constitutional settlement and France, I have the feeling that the ordinary man, of street man, will see academics like acting in a ivory tower, and the idea that academic freedom is something, maybe a guarantee for an elite and not something responding to a general and democratic need. So I think even before a constitutional protection, it's more working on an environment that is in favor of academic freedom and developing a better culture of academic freedom. Thank you.
Okay, so I have to be short, it will be difficult. I have many reasons to oppose the mainstream. I perfectly know the literature, I have read it, and I even wrote in English with some colleagues an article on why we oppose the mainstream on populism. And I must say I'm not radical, because I think we should avoid the term. I have some colleagues who think we should rehabilitate populism and say populism is democracy. That's not a position. I'm a social democrat, I'm not a populist. Okay, so I think that's the idea that populism is anti-pluralism is simply wrong. Historically wrong. This is a meaning of populism which was invented in the 60s. So I give just an example. Go to the Martin Luther King's works and read the speech he pronounced in Montgomery, Alabama, I think in '66. That's the most magnificent eulogy of populism I've ever read, and also of the populist fights against racial segregation. This is an incredible document. And this was the meaning of populism until the 60s. When you read Canova in the 60s or Isaiah Berlin in the 60s, populism means a trend of democracy, a trend which is not social democratic, because there is not, in populism, there is a project of defending democracy against oligarchy, and I really say oligarchy, and not a project of building a socialist society. So the difference between populism and socialism is, in populism, there is first an erosion of common sense, so you don't have to read Das Kapital or have a theory of fetishism of merchandising in order to be socialist, but this is a need in Marxism. So this is very different. So if you want, the model of a populist is Thomas Paine. I think Thomas Paine is the first populist in history, but I would not say he was illiberal or against human rights. And so that's my point. And so that's the first difference, and the other difference that there is no socialist project. It's just we want the democracy. So, and I think we can show that for American populism and for Russian populism. I remember that most of the Russian populists were liberal, and the others were social democrats. And they funded the Social Democratic Party, and then they opposed Leninism. So, and our use of populism is very strange. It's like if we were saying, okay, what is socialism? Socialism, that is Blair and Tony Blair and François Hollande. And so we will write a history of socialism from Adam Smith to Tony Blair and François Hollande. Okay, that's what we do with populism. That's really strange. And I think that's very problematic. So I have many other reasons, but I think there is a populist rhetoric. For example, let's say, when Steve Bannon say, I am in the same continuum as Bernie Sanders. When he says, okay, Bernie Sanders is the left-wing populist, and I'm the right-wing populism. So he uses a populist rhetoric, and he knows perfectly what he does. And insofar as he's a populist, it's also presented itself as hostile to the oligarchs. Okay, but it's a lie. But it's a lie. It's a lie. And I think the origin of the semantic shift is in Latin America. When Gino Germani decided to describe Peronism as a populism, his point was to show that and to insist on the fact that Peronism was not a version of fascism. It was not fascism because there was a strong trend of social equalization, and because the Peronism was a defense of the most poor classes of society. So, and my problem is that maybe there are some populist movement nowadays, but I would say populism is a thing of the past. In order to have populism, you have to live in less differentiated societies than we are. But then the problem is that if you look at Trump, for example, Trump doesn't speak to the dos camaradas, des sans-chemises. I don't know what you say in English for that. But everyone was speaking to the people who were the poorest of the society. Trump speaks to middle class who want to feel on the winner's side. This is not populism. In French, Patrick Sabidan said this is democratization of the oligarchic feeling. And I think that's a better definition than populism.
That's an interesting point. Yeah. Another question?
Okay. Thank you very much for your free presentation. So I have one question, which is mainly for Jean-Yves Pranchère, but maybe also for Juliet and Marie, which is, well, as political theorists and as legal scholars, how can we deal with the fact that often the concept we are dealing with today and yesterday are essentially contested concepts, and the fact that liberalism, constitutionalism, human rights are also reclaimed by the illiberal actors, the fact that those illiberal, the actors, the movements, the intellectuals who we are describing as illiberals do not see themselves as illiberals, but oftenly as true defenders of the original liberal tradition, of the classical liberalism undermined by progressive human rights, by amendments to the originalist constitution. So how can we arbitrate between those how can we deal with those reclaimings of liberalism? Do we use? That's it. I think.
I think there is no magic trick. We have to we have to study a lot. I have no principal solution. I think we have to enter into a conceptual history, and that's a lot of work. And then we have to ask the question, should we describe the political actors as they describe themselves or not? Okay, but I will not describe that. There are some, easy cases. it's clear that we should not describe the popular democracy of the past as popular democracies. Okay, and there are very difficult cases. So, but I have no, so if you ask me, what do we do with liberalism, my answer will take probably 1 hour, so.
That we don't have now. I'm sorry. Maybe one very last question, Juliet?
Yeah, very quick one. Thank you, Jean-Yves. I have just one very short question about populism. So again, sorry. I agree with you that I kind of feel that it's possible to identify a rhetoric, populist rhetoric. But I'm very interested in what you said about the Front Populaire. I just wanted to know, when you say that the Front Populaire was populist, yes. What do you mean by that?
It was an alliance against 200 families. Look at the program and the speeches. You will find all the populist.
So you mean anti-oligarchy?
Do you agree that Marcel Carné is a good cinematic version of the Front Populaire, the same way that the Frank Capra's movies, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington or Meet John Doe, are good illustration of the Rooseveltian times? Okay, so you know that Hotel du Nord was first prize of populist woman. This was populist movies. We totally forget, and same for Capra. So if you want to describe populists, you should not go to the movie to see Leni Riefenstahl's Triumphs des Willen. This is not populism. If you want to have populism, you have to see the man who killed Liberty Johnson. You have to see Meet John Doe. You have to see Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. You have to see It's a Wonderful Life. You have to see La Belle Équipe de Julien Duvivier, which is the movie about the Front Populaire. You have to see Marcel Carné's movies and so on. And in the 30s, this was called populism.
Yeah, but the concept is not the same at all when we speak about Mélenchon's
populism. Okay, but that's
populism.
what I say. The concept changed in the 60s, and that's a huge problem. Because I have many arguments, because it also implies a defeat of historic memory. Nobody knows nowadays what Martin Luther King said in Montgomery, Alabama in '66. That's a problem. If you want to confront illiberalism, I think we should be firm on some historical memories.
But maybe it's not the same concept. It's two concepts with the same name.
That's a problem.
Yeah.
I agree. Well, the final sentence, final words. Thank you so much, all panelists. Thank you so much.